Edwards, the coffee with the extra flavor lift, brings you Night Editor. Yes, once again, the presses roll to bring you Hal Burdick in another of his dramatic yarns from the Night Editor's office. Tonight, a murder story with the intriguing title, The Clue That Wasn't There.
Only Peter Cotley knew the truth, and Peter Cotley was dead. The record would show by his own hand. Then Roger Shullum was aware of something, of a pair of eyes that pointed toward him like the muzzles of rifles, the rifles of an executioner's squad. He blinked rapidly, trying to drive them away, but they stayed there, fastened on his face. The eyes of the officer who had looked up from the gun on the desk.
Well, there are times when even the between editions breathing spell doesn't bring much relaxation from the newsroom grind. And this is one of those nights. But as the late mail edition is put to bed, Bobby leaves his desk for a moment and goes over to the Night Editor's sanctum in the corner. As he enters the little office...
With this murder hanging over our heads, Hal, I guess we don't get out for coffee tonight.
No, I'm afraid not, Bobby. We better stick close to our telephones.
Tell you, we might fix ourselves a quick cup in the food editor's kitchen, if there's any coffee left in the Edwards jar from the last time we raided it.
Well, as soon as the papers come up from the press room, we'll have a look-see, Bobby. Anything new on the big mystery story?
Not a thing. The police, as the saying goes, are baffled.
Yeah.
No clues, the perfect crime and all that sort of thing, you know.
The perfect crime, huh? Well, there are times when a crime can be too perfect, where the missing clues lay the trap. I worked on such a setup once, Bobby.
Sounds like the title for a mystery thriller. Case of a little clue that wasn't there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you might call it that.
Well, do I have to beg you, or do you come right out and tell me?
Well, it is a story with an amazing ending, Bob. And if you'd like to hear it, I'll give it to you. Mystery thriller style.
You start giving, boss.
He stood in the dimness, just beyond the saffron pool of light from the table lamp. Stood as one turned to stone, his eyes glazed with horror, fixed on the man in the armchair. All feeling seemed to have left his body, and with it even the power to think. He could only stand there, rigid, numb, staring at the suddenly misshapen huddle slumped in the chair, at the widening circle of crimson on the temple, at the arm hanging limp, lifeless over the chair's edge. Now the eyes moved to the pistol in his hand, shrouded in the folds of a handkerchief. A long tremble ran over him. He stumbled backward a step, his eyes leaving the dead man in the chair to search the shadows, while the urge to run racked his body. He mustn't run, of course. He must stay right there. The violence of it was over, but there were still things to be done, important things. The gun must be placed. Just as it would have fallen from the hand if the man in the chair had taken his own life. He had to force himself to move close to that crumpled figure again. His thumb and forefinger plucked at the coat sleeve of the limp arm, lifted it, following the motion with the lifting of the gun in his own hand, then letting them fall together. He bent over, studying the position of the gun carefully. Oh, yes, that was it. No one could dispute that. He straightened, folding the handkerchief and putting it in his pocket. He could go on to the next step now. His hand shook as he dialed a number at the desk phone. He knew his voice would be shaky, too, but that was all right. Naturally, he couldn't be expected to be calm after finding the body of his employer shot to death in the den of his big home. A voice came to him over the wire. Dr. Mayfield. Doctor, this is Roger Shullum. Yes? Something terrible has happened. Mr. Cotley has just committed suicide. A tense silence on the wire. Then... Well, I was afraid of that, Shullum. I'll get there as soon as I can. Will you inform the police, please? Yes. A long sigh shook his body as he cradled the receiver. The doctor's words had been like a tonic to his fears. From here on, everything should work out just as he had planned it. Planned it since last night, after he had sat across this same desk from Peter Cotley, hearing the old man saying, I've been living on borrowed time for the past 10 years, Roger. No need to tell you that, of course, since for those 10 years you've handled all my affairs for me. But now my credit with life is running out. Nature is about to foreclose.
You've been a faithful employee, Roger, and you are to get your reward. Today I made arrangements with my attorneys so that, beginning the 1st of next week, all the income from my properties will go to you for so long as you live.
He had looked up, a wild ecstasy surging through him, as the older man went on smiling.
Yes, Roger, I mean it. Even though I should live for some time, the income is to be yours. There must be plenty in my personal accounts to care for me what little time is left me. I've had little need for money in the past years that my illness has confined me largely to this house. So, tomorrow you'll put everything in order. The following day we'll make a complete audit. I haven't bothered with that sort of thing. No need with a man I could trust looking after my affairs, but now that I'm turning everything over to you, I want to know to the penny where things stand.
The thanks had died on his lips. The joy drained from him with a rush that left him weak. He mumbled a few words, finally made his way blindly out of the den and to his room upstairs. And there he had to choke back the cry of bitterness. In one moment he'd been wealthy, in the next impoverished, even to his freedom. An audit, day after tomorrow. No time to cover up. Peter Cotley discovering that his faithful employee hadn't been willing to trust the old man's generosity at the end. Finding that Roger Shullum had systematically robbed him through the years. Now, when he might have had all, he would have none. Through a sleepless night he sat by the window, his mind a torment, and all the time his thoughts coming back to the old man's words.
Living on borrowed time. Now, nature is about to foreclose.
And gradually other pictures began to take form. Cotley, dozing in his big leather chair as he did every evening. The gun in the lower desk drawer where it had lain many years. And with the coming of the dawn, his plan was beginning to take form. A plan that would put an end to all audits and leave him free to enjoy the wealth that was his. He stood aside as the police and medical examiners shouldered their way through the hall and on into the den, Dr. Mayfield with them. From just inside the doorway to the somber room, he watched them going about their grim business. For a moment, the dread of some tiny failure in his carefully planned scheme rose within him, and then he felt easier again as he heard Dr. Mayfield saying, "Well, there's no question about it being suicide, Lieutenant." The detective chief nodded.
Looks that way, all right.
Well, as Mr. Cotley's physician, I've known for a long time that his life was in danger, Lieutenant. When I examined him 2 days ago, I realized it couldn't be much longer. I didn't tell him so, but he read what I was thinking in my face. He said then he meant never to be a burden to anyone.
Well, we have to go through the formalities anyway. Get pictures of the position of the body, boys. Take measurements. Bert, check the gun for fingerprints.
He watched them going about their work as from a distance, his sureness of himself growing with each passing moment. Pah! Let them take their pictures, let them look for fingerprints, let them search and pry all they pleased. They'd find no clue to point an accusing finger at him. And tomorrow, the detective lieutenant was coming toward him.
Where were you when it happened, Shullum?
Well, I was upstairs in my room. I heard the shot. Like the doctor, I was afraid something like this might happen. I came down here and found him there.
Were you the only other person in the house?
Yes, the housekeeper goes home nights.
As soon as the boys get through, I'll have to question you further.
That fear welled up within him again, then died away as Dr. Mayfield said quietly,
"If you have the remotest suspicion Roger may have had anything to do with this, I think I can reassure you, Lieutenant. Well, my job to be suspicious until I know he was the old man's business manager. Might be a motive in that.
2 days ago, Mr. Cotley had his attorneys arrange things so that Roger was to have the income from his properties beginning at once. Even if Mr. Cotley lived, Roger was to get the money. He had absolutely nothing to gain by his death."
Oh, I see. Well, that does put a different light on it. No offense, Shullum. We have to be careful.
Oh, of course, of course. His quick laughter had the sharpness of relief. So that was it. He had nothing more to fear. He had planned well, and in a moment, it would be all over. The photographer was putting away his gear. The medical examiners were motioning to the coroner's men that they could remove the body. Only the fingerprint man remained intent on his task under the glow from the desk lamp. Roger Shullum watched him, smiling inwardly. Let him dust with his powders and examine with his glass. He'd find no telltale marks on the bright steel. The planning had been too careful for that. For a moment, his relaxed mind carried him away from the grisly scene. It leaped ahead into the days to come, the days when someone else would carry out the tasks of handling the business for him, and he would be the one to live in ease. No fear, no worry. Only Peter Cotley could have stopped him, and Peter Cotley was dead, and the record would show by his own hand. And now the fabric of his dreams was torn suddenly, and through the jagged rent he could see a pair of eyes that pointed toward him like the muzzles of rifles, the rifles of the executioner squad. A choking sensation came back to him. The fear flamed within him. He blinked rapidly, trying to drive them out of his dreams, but they stayed there, seeming to grow brighter, more accusing. The eyes of the fingerprint man who had looked up from the gun on the desk. Oh, what was the matter with the fellow? Why was he looking at him like that? What brought that grim little smile to his lips? Why was he fixing him with that accusing gaze? Not speaking, just sitting there, looking. The lieutenant's voice broke the silence harshly.
Now, Bert, you finished?
Yes, Chief. He stood up, came toward them, the eyes narrowing. And to Roger Shullum, murderer, they no longer were rifle barrels, but long corridors, down which he seemed to see a green baize door, through which men passed never to return.
What'd you find, Bert? Something I think will interest you, Chief.
No, it wasn't possible. Hadn't he wrapped the gun in the handkerchief? Hadn't he been smart enough to think of that? What did the fellow mean?
Different sort of evidence than we usually get, Chief. New twist on fingerprint work. The clue that isn't there. Maybe Shullum can explain it.
All eyes were on him, and he knew that his guilt must be painted in his face. And then suddenly it was as though a blinding white light had been turned on him as he realized the one mistake he had made. The mistake that the fingerprint man was putting into the words of an accusation. As he went on, "You see, Chief, I didn't find anything on the gun. Not even Mr. Cotley's fingerprints. Which is mighty curious. If he shot himself."
Well, folks, you've heard the story of the clue that wasn't there. Which reminds me of another kind of clue. A clue that's always there. A clue to real coffee enjoyment. Yes, I mean the delicious extra flavor lift you'll find in Edwards coffee. Now, the reason you will always find this extra rich flavor in Edwards coffee is simply this. The Edwards people blend and roast coffee to their own custom formula, perfected 2 generations ago. Only the choicest Central and South American coffee beans form the exclusive Edwards blend. Beans selected for size, shape, and color. Blended by flavor, not by weight, and always in small batches. Every pound of Edwards coffee is thermally roasted by heated air, not by flame. So all the full, rich, natural coffee flavor stays right where it belongs, in the coffee. Yes, Edwards coffee really has the flavor. Ground for you right at the store, too, for absolute freshness. Try a pound, won't you? And if you don't thoroughly enjoy Edwards Extra Flavor Lift, your money refunded. Edwards coffee is featured at all Safeway stores. Well, just time now for a word from Hal about next week's Night Editor story. What's ahead for us then, Hal?
Well, for the first time in a long while, it brings back a favorite character of many a Night Editor yarn. Uncle Billy Camp.
Oh, boy, did I hear you say Uncle Billy?
That's right, Bobby. The old sage of Skeleton Creek comes back to us in a dramatically humorous story about a dog, titled Uncle Billy's Witness. It's a yarn I think you'll all enjoy, and I hope you'll be with us when I tell it next week. Good night.
Be sure to listen next week at this same time when the roar of the presses brings us Night Editor and Hal Burdick. This is Bill Baldwin saying goodnight for Edwards Coffee.